Welcome to Conversations from St. Norbert College, a program that encourages discussion in our community on today's local and global issues. Now your host for Conversations from St. Norbert College, author, professor, and nationally known sports economist, Dr. Kevin Quinn.
Welcome to Conversations from St. Norbert College. I'm Kevin Quinn. Our special guest is Dr. Regina Barreca, professor of English at the University of Connecticut, and we'll discuss how gender and humor function in the workplace, the classroom, and in media. Regina, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
Well, this is a real treat to have you here. I'm pretty sure this is the first time I've gotten to interview anybody who's in the Friars Club.
Oh, that's so nice.
Which to me is the pantheon of humor, especially on the East Coast. You know, growing up watching all those roasts and everything that were just great, and still, I guess they're still doing it. But before we get to that, I just am so impressed because you have managed to put together a career and a life that is a great mix of serious academic work and just great popular writing. And you've been on Oprah, you've been on 2020, you've been on Dr. Phil. I mean, what a cool thing. So thanks for coming here.
Thank you.
So tell us a little bit about what you do.
Well, I write about my particular sort of scholarly interest when I first started out, when I wrote my dissertation, actually. It was on the differences between men and women's humor. And I focused on those differences in terms of modern British literature, which remains sort of my specialty in terms of what I teach at UConn and the dissertations that I advise for my graduate students. But then I decided that I also wanted to reach a different kind of audience, as well as my scholarly colleagues at universities. I wanted to make sure that folks who were not reading material published in small academic journals could also get some of the ideas that I was putting out there. So if I was writing about the way that Jane Austen used humor, I also wanted to write about the way that Lucille Ball used humor. And this was back in the late 80s. You know, I'm 58, so there was not this much sort of crossover between sort of public scholarship the way there is now, you know, where people are really trying to make sure that their word as scholars and as academics sort of reaches a larger audience. And so I wrote sort of two books one summer. I revised my dissertation, and I wrote the book that I've got in front of me now. They used to call me Snow White, but I drifted, and which was just reissued after 30 years in a classic edition, because it's been around for so long. And it's an Old Mae West line, you know, for the title. You can't go wrong with an Old Mae West line. And I wanted to make sure that, you know, my cousins from New Jersey could understand what I was saying in the dissertation, so that instead of just applying it to literary text or Virginia Woolf or people they might not know, I wanted to apply it to the Patty Duke Show. I wanted to look at how humor functioned in the dating game or the newlywed game, or movies that we were watching, that we grew up watching, and then how humor functioned differently for men and women in everyday life. And so once I started to do that, I realized that that was really fun. It was sort of like not quite talking in two voices, but just to sort of make sure that the examples, like if a theoretical underpinning of an idea worked, that there is really gender difference in humor, then it would work not only in a scholarly arena, but in an everyday popular culture arena.
Well, one of the things I think is just emblematic of what it is that you're saying about that is if you happen into a Three Stooges festival, okay, you're going to find that it looks gender imbalanced.
Yes, that's right.
And I'm sure. So talk about that a little bit.
Okay.
What are the differences? I mean, what's funny to men is different than what's funny to women.
What's funny to women? Women hate the Three Stooges. If you are with a woman who says she likes the Three Stooges, she's faking it.
But she likes me then.
But she likes you,
okay.
right. I mean, it's
That's
clear,
good enough.
it's courtship behavior. I mean, anthropologists could follow this and then then at some point, you know, 4 months or 4 years into the relationship, she will explain that she really hates the Three Stooges. You never see women going up to other women at meetings, at conferences, at weddings, at events going, nyeh, nyeh, nyeh. Women don't do this.
I have not.
No, women have not spent months of our lives as teenagers perfecting the nyuk nyuk sound. We do not hit each other across the forehead by way of showing affection, and yet men do this. God bless you. I mean, it's great. There should be a 24/7 Stooges channel. My husband, my stepsons, my brother, they love the Stooges. Just don't tell us it's funny. Women don't do that. Women do not go up to other women and go, pull my finger. We don't think that's funny. And so, but for years, because the masculine has always been the defining feature of the culture, that if we didn't find the Three Stooges funny, then there was something wrong with us. What's the matter, honey? Don't you have a sense of humor? Oh, come on. I mean, one of the things I talk about in Snow White is the fact that men would believe, and again, not every man, I'm talking gross generalizations because life is short, that I know men, I'm married to one, who will rewind digitally, either on YouTube or we actually own the DVD of Blazing Saddles, for example, and who consider Blazing Saddles to be the pinnacle of the creation of comedy since Aristophanes wrote The Frogs, and I like Blazing Saddles, but the part they like in Blazing Saddles is the fart scene in Blazing Saddles. And now women don't really like the fart scene in Blazing Saddles, but men will rewind. If women are not laughing, men will rewind to that part to say this is funny, and then they will sort of mansplain why it's funny. They'll rewind because they think you missed like the subtle nuance of the fart scene. And you're going, this is not what I find funny. And then they go, why? And you go, because I live with it. This is really not a discussion we need to have. So, and one of the other big differences between men and women's humor, and this, I talk to a lot of all men's groups, which is always a lot of fun. I come as like the woman whisperer. Like I'm there to answer questions that they don't want to ask, that they think are impolite, but I'll talk about anything. And there'll be a banner and it'll say, Dr. Regina Barreca, sexual harassment workshop. And there are some guys who think I'm going to help them do it better, and they're disappointed.
Unfortunately, I think there are still some of those guys in the workplace.
They're there.
They're disappearing slowly.
Yeah, exactly, but they're still there, and I'm happy to accept the responsibility of addressing them. But they want to know, and I think it's a good question, why women can't tell a joke. And it's true. Most women can't tell a joke. We will not only not remember the punchline to a joke, we will ruin jokes for others. Right? Because we will remember everything. We will remember the name of the dog of our best friend from junior high, but we will not remember the punchline to a joke we heard last night. So a man that we know will, be standing next to us, and we'll come up and, I'd be at a gathering, and we'll say, "Oh, Sam, tell that joke that we heard last night. Tell the one about the shrimp." And Sam will go, "I can't tell the one about the shrimp. Shrimp is the punchline. I can never tell that joke again." And that's not because women don't have a sense of humor, but because women don't tell jokes. Women tell stories. When a man has something funny to say, you can hold up your watch and go, right? And he'll say, 2 blondes walk into a bar with a Dalmatian, bada boom, bada bing, you're done with the joke. Okay?
I'd like to hear that joke.
Yeah, I know, exactly. I just made that up. I'm really not on something that's going to go out on the internet. And but when a woman says something, I got something funny to tell you. If you're smart, you'll sit down because you're going to be there a long, long time, right? You're going to pour yourself a cup of coffee. You're going to open a can of soda because she's going to say, "Okay, I was driving on the highway, and I thought, you know what, I need a cup of coffee, but I'm trying to cut down on caffeine, because I started to take estrogen, and it sort of interferes with the intake of estrogen, and other women are coming over going, well, you have to watch about taking estrogen, because estrogen really has some interesting side effects. Other women are coming over, you know what you do? You do half calf, half decaf. They'll let you mix the half calf and the half decaf. Other women are coming over saying, only green tea. You should use green tea to detox. There's some poor guy who's sitting there going, they said they were going to talk about something funny. The women are laughing, and he's saying, what's funny? And women are saying, my life is funny. We're hysterical here. So there's a real gap between what men think is funny and what women think is funny. But that women have, because we have for so long in our culture, again, been using as models a sort of a masculine culture, that we have for a very long time thought we don't have a sense of humor. We lack a sense of humor. Women and girls have always, again, at some point been told, oh, what's the matter, honey, can't you take a joke? Oh, you're so sensitive. You can't say anything funny around her, she's just gonna get mad. When, in fact, if you know real women, it takes us like 12 seconds to start laughing, right? You walk past a ladies' room, there is always laughter coming out of the ladies' room. There is, you'll have
I've
to
always
agree.
wondered about that.
Yeah, there's always laughter coming. There is rarely laughter coming out of the men's room.
I would wonder about that too.
Exactly. And when there is, it should make us, you guys like have like troughs and stuff in there. We have like a whole spa going on. We have music and flowers.
You have couches. I remember as a kid when I found out that there were couches in there, I thought, if there is a couch in a men's room someplace, I don't want to know about it.
Exactly. So there are these real differences. And it's different when we grow up. Little boys grow up hazing each other with humor. You have nasty nicknames for each other that show affection. Boys go up to other little boys and go, yo, bucket face. And that's a way of being nice. You know, they'll go up to each other. You know, some guy has lost his hair and they've looked everywhere for it, but they can't find it. And they'll go up to other men, I mean, adults, you know, academic colleagues I'm talking about. They'll go up and say, hey, Bruce, shine that up there. I got some in my eye. And that's their way of saying, how's it going? How's the family? Kids? I mean, that's their way of communicating. Women do not go up to other women and go, Nancy, 3 months pregnant or going heavy on the gravy? You know, we don't say that. Women don't haze through humor. We're kind even in our humor. It's a different, but you know I'm telling the truth.
I know. My wife is the oldest of 10, and 8 of the 10 are female. And as I was, getting to know them, you know, and some of them were in grammar school, some were in high school. I mean, I found myself in a strange new land, and the way that they communicated with each other was really strange to me. I mean, I didn't understand it, and I didn't even know that I didn't understand it until that happened. Years later, when I got to the college here, I was the advisor for an all-female social group, and I was utterly fascinated. I went to all their meetings, and I was utterly fascinated by the way decisions got made. You know, with guys, it's sort of hierarchical. The vote is taken, the decision is made, and you move on, right? So I would go to a weekly meeting, and there'd be a vote. And first of all, everyone would check to see how the other people are voting. They'd vote. And then show up at the meeting the next week, and it was a completely different decision, and then most people were on board with it. And I just didn't even begin to understand how that worked.
And this goes, I mean, Carol Gilligan does a great job of talking about this in a different voice, in her book, A Different Voice, because she's talking about sort of situational ethics when it comes to women. And that you're right, that men set up systems where there were rules, and they follow the rules, and that's how it works. And it's sort of like either you won or you didn't win, and now we're done with the decision and we move on. And that women are, as you said, looking at what other people are saying. There's picking up the vibe. Is somebody going to be upset about this? How is this going to work? And that often what Gilligan argues is that if girls cannot agree on the rules, for example, even in playground activity, they will stop playing the game. Rather than fight over the rule, they will stop playing the game, switch the game to another one that they can all agree on. They will not fight out the rules. That is not the method of communication between women. And I think that works in humor too, that it will be a sort of a collective humor, where often when men are joke telling, and this is something that, you know, as the only full-time female academic who's a friar, it was really interesting to get into the Friars Club.
Oh, I bet.
And it's a great place. I mean, I really love it, and I'm honored to be part of that group. And I think I'm the only person who, I'm in the Connecticut Women's Hall of Fame and in the Friars Club. It's
That's an interesting Venn diagram.
Exactly. Yeah. It's an unusual pattern, but I really enjoy it. But that men, when they're telling jokes, they're not so much listening to the other joke that's being told or the story. They're waiting to tell theirs. They're thinking, I got a better one than this. I'm going to top this. Where women are sort of collectively coming in and going, that happened to you, that happened to me. And for them, it's the opening up rather than the competition. So it's a very different pattern of humor, and it's not surprising to me that there have been these differences. And this comes out, you mentioned the workplace, this comes out in very big ways as women are entering the workplace in increasingly larger numbers, although still in ways that we need to compensate for, because there's still not enough women in positions of power in large organizations and ones that have, you know, a real chance of remaking American culture. But that they're told when, let's say, they need to give a speech, oh, go in and make a joke. Now, that's not going to work for a woman. That is not her method. There are very few women for whom that's going to work. That's not our method of communicating. That's not how we start. That's using a male paradigm that is actually probably going to fail for the speaker, because that's not what she does. And so I suggest when I go in and I work, I give the opening talk to the Yale Campaign School for Women every year, or the Women's Campaign School at Yale, now they changed the name. And these are women who are running for office. And they're often told that they need to follow this male pattern. And I'm trying to get them to say, if you want to connect with your audience, you're funny, but you need to be funny in your way, not to get up there and do a bad version of a script that was written for somebody who's actually not like you. And so to reshape women's humor to actually fit us, not to cross-dress our humor, is, I think, a really important idea.
It is, and as you were saying that, I was thinking about your own piece. If you haven't seen it online, check out the Buying a Bathing Suit at TJ Maxx. That's great. But it's a story, and it's a sharing story. Compare that to, say, Stephen Wright, who has these one-liners that are almost malapropisms, but they're not. I mean, the pieces don't fit together, and that's what makes it funny,
Yeah.
But that's about as polar opposite as you can be. So when you and I were growing up, there were female comedy figures. There was Lucille Ball. You mentioned Mae West earlier, but not a lot. Okay, Phyllis Diller in some ways was a real path breaker.
Yes.
But she managed to get into the all male, sort of Catskills club in a sense, but it was very self-deprecating.
Yes. Phyllis Diller, Joan Rivers, the women who were doing that, and one of the things that I think was particularly interesting about Phyllis Diller is that she actually was beautiful, and I think she had won a beauty contest. I mean, her life was so fascinating. I think she's a great figure to look at. She was this very attractive woman, but the men that she was working with, the agents, the booking agents, said, you can't look like that. You can't be an attractive woman. And I think we're still dealing with this with people like Sarah Silverman, who's beautiful, that we're saying, you can't be that good looking. She wore that fright wig, she had the long cigarette holders, she always wore bizarre clothes that didn't quite fit.
A bathrobe, I think, in the 70s, right?
Sometimes. But it was part of the idea that you could not be attractive and make humor. That when you go up to a man, and I talk about this when I talk to the groups that I work with, and if I go up to a guy and said, I have a girlfriend you love, she has a great sense of humor. The guy often still thinks she has an eye in the middle of her forehead, she's not, it's different. It's the idea that women who are beautiful are not funny. That if you're funny, you've had to compensate for something else in your life that usually has to do with being unattractive. When they were booking Phyllis Diller, they said, you need to have people not look at you, but listen to you. As if you couldn't have a woman do both at the same time. That if she was good looking, then no one was going to listen to her. And so that you had a lot of women comics following in that same pattern. So that you had Joan Rivers, that they had to get up there and say, again, an attractive woman, but it needed to get up there and say, oh, I'm so ugly, I'm so skinny, I'm so this, I'm so... that followed with Roseanne Barr. To go there and to be, the sort of the woman who was an outcast in sort of the sexual marketplace. And I think that is one of the things that's changing now in terms of the younger female comics, is that they are acknowledging their sexuality. They're not up there as sort of pinup girls, but they expect to be listened to, even though they're not, sort of distorting themselves to become something else. For Snow White, I interviewed a lot of female stand-up comics. I went to a lot of bars and talked to them. Somebody had to do it.
Sounds awful.
It was a long time ago.
When cable television, I think, created just this tsunami of comedy. In fact, I think that the voracious appetite for the programming outstripped the supply of good talent. So there were a lot of folks that you wouldn't necessarily have seen. Some were great, some were not. One of the things that always sort of bothered me is that the female comics of the 80s and even into the early 90s were very often all about self-deprecating
Right.
humor. And at some point it was like, oh my God, just take it easy on yourself already.
Yeah.
But we have a different crowd now. We have people like Amy Schumer,
Right.
who, you mentioned Sarah Silverman,
Right.
Chelsea Handler.
Yeah,
is another one.
absolutely.
In fact, the book that you mentioned before about why women drink or whatever. What's the title of that book?
I edited a book called from the University Press of New England, and it's called "Make Mine a Double: Why Women Like Us Like to Drink or Not." And actually, it's both the good girl and the bad girl book, because all the proceeds from the book actually go to a fund where women who can't afford their own medical health get help. So people are writing, and there are some people writing about not drinking, but the majority of them are writing about drinking.
But Chelsea Handler has sort of occupied her own little corner of American culture lately, and she turns off a lot of people,
Yes.
right? Because of how outspoken that she is. I think she's hilarious.
Yes,
actually,
I do
if you
too.
want to know the truth.
Yeah.
But talk about some of the other folks that are, the popular people like Amy Poehler,
Yeah. Tina Fey, right.
What do you think typifies this particular generation? Is that we're finally at a time where people can be themselves, or
Well, that there is a fearlessness there. So that one of the stories that I tell in this new version of Snow White is the one that Tina Fey told in Bossy Pants, which is a great book, and where she's talking about that even in the Saturday Night Live, the highest form of comedy, of sort of once a week doing this stuff, hard to do, right? So much, they get the best of the business. So that when Tina Fey was a writer there and a performer, and then Amy Poehler came in, and that some of the guys, I don't remember which of the men were sort of running it, that might have been Seth Meyers, I don't know who it was, and maybe even Jimmy Kimmel was there, and they were still putting the women in the Saturday Night Live cast in positions of being the girlfriend, the mom, the supporting character, and Amy Poehler came in and wanted to do some like unattractive, aggressive female character, and one of the guys said, ooh, that scares me, and Amy Poehler said, I don't give a whatever that scares you, we're doing that. And Tina Fey said, oh, here is my friend. This was, Amy Poehler came in and said, I think it's funny, we're doing it. I think it's funny. And so it wasn't looking for approval. The critical commentator, wonderful sociologist, anthropologist, Elizabeth Janeway, has a definition of power that I make my classes write down because I think it's so succinct and correct, which is that power is the ability not to have to please. And one of the interesting things about comics is they need to get the audience on their side, but often it's not done by pleasing them. If you go in to please 900 people, they're gonna kill you. And on stage, you either, whatever the stage is, and we know it as professors, we know it as teachers, you either kill or you die, right? There's nothing in between it. You get everybody on your side or you lose them. And you never do that by losing your own power. You have to get out there and you're the one in control. You pick up a mic, you're the center of attention, and you have to hold that attention, and you cannot worry about whether or not they like you. They have to listen to you, and you have to earn their respect, and you can never put the power back onto them. If you worry about whether they like you or not, you lose that power. And for women who are brought up in our society in a conventional way, women are supposed to please. We're supposed to, again, as you said, look around at what everybody else is saying, seeing if everybody else thinks we're okay. So for a woman to pick up the mic and say, I'm going to do this, I think this is funny. And because I think this is funny, I'm going to make this work. That's a pretty powerful and insurgent statement. So I think that every time a woman opens her mouth and says something besides making a cooing noise, every time we pick up a mic and go anything besides like, what did you, it's sort of like a feminist statement. And if you're out there with the ambition of making people laugh, of having people listen to you, and for the moment that people are laughing together, you have people standing, looking in the same direction that you're looking in. Even if it's against their will. People can laugh against their will. Like they might not agree with you politically or whatever, but if you say something funny enough, they'll get you. And Steve Wright, it was a great existential comic. I wouldn't say that his work is so different from women's humor. I would say that for a lot of women's humor, I would say that the comics who are so different from that would be like the old Andrew Dice Clay, would be like the ones whose work is always at the expense of a vulnerable group. The people who make fun of people who are fat, the people who make fun of people who stutter, the people who make fun of the poor, the people who make fun of things that cannot be changed in their lives. Women's laughter and humor tends to move upward. It makes fun of the powerful rather than the powerless. And I think that that's also another big difference.
I find that the highest form of stupidity is to heckle a professional comic on stage.
It's really...
You have to be, because there are some of the, they're wired differently, and they're wired to think quickly, and they have this whole repertoire of things, and they have the power. They're standing there with the light on them, and they're up on the elevated stage.
Right.
I just don't even understand why somebody would do something like that. I want to switch gears a little bit to the academic side, which I think is also fascinating. So one of the things that you did was you edited the Signet Book of American Humor, right? Which is that has a long history, or you edited a new version of it, right?
Right.
So what was that like to say, okay, you are now the curator of what's funny in America, going as far back as you want? Go.
It was really interesting, and actually one of the most sort of difficult parts of the whole thing wasn't making the choices, because there's so much out there. You want to gather everything in, but again, not to get too esoteric about it, but you have to pay to include people's work, right? So you need to get permissions from the publishers or from their agents.
Especially because a lot of this wasn't written, I don't think. It was transcribed, right?
Right, well, some of it was transcribed, but let's say I wanted to include more of, for example, not my favorite person in the world for personal reasons, but I think Woody Allen is very funny. So I wanted to include more of Woody Allen. And to include, for example, a 500-word section of that would have cost, I think, something like $5,000. And you get a budget of, let's say, $15,000 for the whole book. I can't spend $5,000 to include that. So instead I do what's fair use, so I have like 6 lines, and that's all I could do. But then what the great thing was to be able to include, I did pay, for example, because there were things I just wanted my favorite pieces in the book. So I did the whole Who's on First.
You opened with that.
I opened with Abbott and Costello because Who's on First is still one of the most brilliant pieces of humor ever written. It's meticulously crafted, and it still works. My students have never heard of Abbott and Costello. They don't know from Abbott and Costello.
Man.
I will have them read it out loud to each other. I'll give them copies of the book. They will read it. They will be laughing so much, and the other kids who have never heard this before will be on the floor. So the fact that it still works now is just a delight.
Vaudeville, if I can interrupt.
Sure, please.
Vaudeville is still funny.
No, a lot of it still is. It really is.
With the return of Pabst Blue Ribbon, and every young person in their 20s wants to recreate their grandfather's existence. I'm surprised that vaudeville has not been rediscovered in some fashion. Sorry to interrupt.
No, that's right. And a lot of these comics came out of vaudeville, and it came out of the sort of the penny seats. Like Shakespeare, you had to pay. You had to, make humor worked for the penny seats, and they had to work, do it for the people who were actually paying $10, which was, somebody's take-home pay for the year in, 1929 or 1930. But even before that, the people like Mae West, who were vaudeville performers, people like Jack Benny or George Burns, who sort of came out of those things. But to do the Signet Book, I also wanted to make sure that voices that hadn't been included earlier, the voices of women, the voices of people of color, I wanted to make sure Moms Mabley was in there. Who was also another vaudevillian, another early performer. I wanted to make sure that working class comics who had often been seen as ephemeral, that their voices were part of the canon, if you're talking about sort of forming the canon. So those things were just a delight to be able to put in there. And it was just fun to say, oh no, what I have to do as my academic work right now is read everything funny for the last 200 years. That's a good job.
This has been absolutely wonderful. Dr. Barreca, I'm sure 100 years from now, the work that you're leaving behind is still going to be taught in college classrooms.
Oh, you're too kind. Thank you.
It's pretty clear. That's a wonderful place to be. I hope you've all enjoyed our show as much as I have. Until next time, I'm Kevin Quinn. Best wishes for good conversations from St. Norbert College.